D-Day, 50 years after. It is now 1 o'clock in the afternoon here in Normandy, France, 7 o'clock in the morning, Eastern Time in the United States of America. At this hour, 50 years ago, fighting was raging just behind us on Omaha Beach. I'm Frank Sesno.
And I'm Hilary Bowker. Well, earlier today, at sunrise, President Clinton aboard the USS George Washington, the aircraft carrier, held a sunrise ceremony at which he spoke. He also put a wreath in the ocean, a traditional...
The wreath will now be placed into the sea.
Let's listen in here for a minute. Laying the wreath, the tradition when a warship passes the wreckage of another warship flying its flag. The wreckage there of the USS Corey, which sank 50 years ago. This morning's ceremony to commemorate those who died at sea during the D-Day invasion.
And all those listening as we pray, make way.
21-gun salute in their honor here.
During that ceremony aboard the George Washington, the President referred to these landings here at Normandy as the pivot point of the war. From the George Washington, which is a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, most certainly was not on duty here during the D-Day landings, Mr. Clinton boarded Marine II, the helicopter, and headed off to another famous site, Point du Hoc. There, the President made a series of remarks after meeting with the veterans, the Army Rangers, some of whom were among those valiant men who stormed the cliffs and survived those vicious days 50 years ago. Here now a replay of the President's remarks earlier today at Point du Hoc.
General Downing, Mr. Hathaway, honored leaders of our military, distinguished veterans and members of the armed services, family and friends, my fellow Americans. We stand on sacred soil. 50 years ago at this place, a miracle of liberation began. On that morning, democracy's forces landed to end the enslavement of Europe. Around 7 a.m., Lieutenant Colonel James Earl Rudder, 2nd Ranger Battalion, United States Army, led 224 men onto the beaches below and up these unforgiving cliffs. Bullets and grenades came down upon them, but by a few minutes after 7, here, exactly here, the first Rangers stood. Today, let us ask those American heroes to stand again. Corporal Ken Bargman, who sits here to my right, was one of them. He had just celebrated his 20th birthday out in the Channel. A young man like all the rest of them, cold and wet, far from home, preparing for the challenge of his life. Ken Bargman and the other Rangers of Point du Hoc and all the other Americans, British, Canadian, and Free French who landed were the tip of a spear the free world had spent years sharpening. A spear they began on this morning in 1944 to plunge into the heart of the Nazi Empire. Most of them were new to war, but all were armed with the ingenuity of free citizens and the confidence that they fought for a good cause under the gaze of a loving God. The fortunate ones would go home changed forever. Thousands would never return. And today we mourn their loss. But on the gray dawn, millions, literally millions of people on this continent awaited their arrival. Young Anne Frank wrote in her diary these words: "It's no exaggeration to say that all Amsterdam, all Holland, yes, the whole west coast of Europe talks about the invasion day and night, debates about it, makes bets on it, and hopes. I have the feeling friends are approaching." The young men who came fought for the very survival of democracy. Just 4 years earlier, some thought democracy's day had passed. Hitler was rolling across Europe. In America, factories worked at only half capacity. Our people were badly divided over what to do. The future seemed to belong to the dictators. They sneered at democracy, its mingling of races and religions, its tolerance of dissent. They were sure we didn't have what it took. Well, they didn't know James Rutter or Ken Bargmann or the other men of D-Day. They didn't understand what happens when the free unite behind a great and worthy cause. For human miracles begin with personal choices. Millions of them gathered together as one, like the stars of a majestic galaxy. Here at this place, in Britain, in North America, and among resistance fighters in France and across Europe, all those numberless choices came together. The choices of lion-hearted leaders to rally their people. The choices of people to mobilize for freedom's fight. The choices of their soldiers to carry on that fight into a world worn weary by devastation and despair. Every person in the democracies pitched in. Every shipbuilder who built a landing craft. Every woman who worked in a factory. Every farmer who grew food for the troops. Every miner who carved coal out of a cavern. Every child who tended a victory garden. All of them did their part. All produced things with their hands and their hearts that went into this battle. And on D-Day, all across the free world, the peoples of democracy prayed that they had done their job right. Well, they had done their job right. And here, you, the Army Rangers, did yours. Your mission was to scale these cliffs and destroy the howitzers at the top that threatened every Allied soldier and ship within miles. You fired grappling hooks onto the cliff tops. You waded ashore, and you began to climb. Up on ropes slick with sea and sand. Up as the Germans shot down and tried to cut your lines. Up sometimes holding to the cliffs with nothing but the knives you had and your own bare hands. As the battle raged at Juneau, Sword, and Gold, on Omaha and Utah, you took devastating casualties. But you also took control of these commanding heights. Around 9 a.m., 2 Rangers discovered the big guns hidden inland and disabled them with heat grenades. At that moment, you became the first Americans on D-Day to complete your mission. We look at this terrain and we marvel at your fight. We look around us and we see what you were fighting for. For here are the daughters of Colonel Rutter. Here are the son and grandson of Corporal Bargmann. Here are the faces for whom you risked your lives. Here are the generations for whom you won a war. We are the children of your sacrifice. We are the sons and daughters you saved from tyranny's reach. We grew up behind the shield of the strong alliances you forged in blood upon these beaches, on the shores of the Pacific, and in the skies above. We flourished in the nation you came home to build. The most difficult days of your lives bought us 50 years of freedom. You did your job, now we must do ours. Let us begin by teaching our young people about the villainy that started this war and the valor that ended it. Let us carry on the work you began here. The sparks of freedom you struck on these beaches were never extinguished, even in the darkest days behind the Iron Curtain. 5 years ago, the miracle of liberation was repeated, as the rotting timbers of communism came tumbling down. Now we stand at the start of a new day. The Soviet Empire is gone. So many people who fought as our partners in this war, the Russians, the Poles, and others, now stand again as our partners in peace and democracy. Our work is far from done. Still, there are cliffs to scale. We must work to contain the world's most deadly weapons, to expand the reach of democracy. We must keep ready arms and strong alliances. We must have strong families and cohesive societies and educated citizens and vibrant, open economies that promote cooperation, not conflict. And if we should ever falter, we need only remember you at this spot 50 years ago and you again at this spot today. The flame of your youth became freedom's lamp, and we see its light reflected in your faces still, and in the faces of your children and grandchildren. We commit ourselves, as you did, to keep that lamp burning for those who will follow. You completed your mission here, but the mission of freedom goes on. The battle continues. The longest day is not yet over. God bless you, and God bless America.
President Clinton speaking earlier today at Point du Hoc in a ceremony that brought back many memories to those Rangers who scaled those cliffs. Interesting point, Hilary. Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Commander, Allied Expeditionary Forces, came back some years after these events, looked at those cliffs, recalled the Rangers scaling them, and said simply it took guts to get up those cliffs that day.
Guts, almost a miracle, I think. We'll continue our live coverage of the anniversary of D-Day in a few moments. We'll be talking live, of course, with CNN's Wolf Blitzer, senior White House correspondent. What you're seeing now are a number of soldiers down on the beach at Omaha, getting ready for the international ceremony, including all the Allied leaders that will take place here in just under 2 hours' time. And, of course, CNN will bring you that ceremony live.
We never could have landed again that summer. And that would have put us in the winter when the weather would have been impossible on shore. That would have meant maybe a year.
D-Day Remembered, the liberation of Europe, is brought to you by
Germans thinking this is where the invasion will occur. The Allied plan to deceive the Germans involves an entire phony division headed up by General George Patton, complete with dummy landing craft, vehicles, and camps. It is created and deployed in the south of England and successfully convinces the Germans that the invasion will be at Calais.
Everything one did was designed to make him reinforce the Pas-de-Calais and to hold him there as long as possible.
In England, meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of soldiers board ships, many unaware of their destination. Just after midnight, June the 6th, American and British paratroopers are dropped behind enemy lines to help secure bridges and roadways so that those who survive the beach landing can move inland. They will be the first, these paratroopers, to engage the enemy. On the morning of June the 6th, 1944, a storm that had raged over much of this beach in Normandy was lifting. Up and down the coast, the Germans who manned the big guns were asleep in their bunkers. At dawn, their wake-up call would be a pounding barrage from Allied naval guns.
It was a glorious sight to see the big belches of orange flame out of those big guns. The barrels seemed like they were red hot, just pumping one shell after another.
It was otherworldly, the way the earth shook and trembled. I curled up as small as I could and stuck my head in the dirt, and I just prayed. Help me, Mary. The time is come.
6:30 a.m. It is now H hour, the hour of landing.
When that ramp went down, when a good buddy of ours started to cry and scream, he says, I can't go in, Claire, I can't. He says, you've got to go, you've got to go. He says, now you've got to go get on shore as fast as you can and get up that beach.
At Utah Beach, the American force lands quickly and successfully. They had come to shore a mile away from their intended target, but they hit a poorly defended area. In a matter of hours, the German defenses are broken, and the Americans are on their way inland. At Juneau, the Canadian beach, choppy seas delay the assault. Higher tides push landing craft through heavily mined obstacles. There are few casualties, but many landing craft are sunk or damaged. The landings at the British beaches are not without serious resistance, but it collapses when the first wave of soldiers gets on shore and over the beachhead, and within hours, men are over the wall and fighting in the village streets. At Omaha Beach, however, it is almost a disaster. The Americans are pinned down on the beach for hours. The naval guns have not hit the German fortifications above, and German troops have been moved up as reinforcements.
We knew it wasn't going according to plan. We knew that the beaches weren't open, that there was a lot of chaos, and that it was just an overall feeling of chaos and confusion.
The first U.S. company to hit the beach at Omaha loses 96% of its men in the first 2 minutes.
There on the beach were bodies of GIs being washed up and back by the waves. The water was full of blood, and they were dead. Then I began to realize that this is serious business.
It would be the longest day, but because the Germans are still convinced that this was not the main invasion, Hitler kept the strongest Panzer tank divisions in reserve. For those of us who are younger, use your imagination again. Imagine those paratroopers coming across here from England in the dark, dropping behind the German lines, in many cases into fields that the Germans had flooded. The 101st Airborne and the 82nd Airborne came to the west. 36 troopers from the 82nd Airborne drowned that night, and the 101st Airborne dropped 6,600 men there, and only 1,000 of them reached their destination originally. There was so much chaos. In a moment, we'll meet some of those men who have come back to Normandy 50 years later, because they were determined to jump into France again.
Think of the enormity of transporting hundreds of thousands of soldiers and all their fighting equipment across the English Channel. It was as if in Green Bay, Racine, and Kenosha, Wisconsin, every man, woman, child, and vehicle were picked up and moved from the west side of Lake Michigan to the east side in a single night. This Good Morning America ABC News special will continue in a moment.